Hello guys, this is your friend Itachi Fanfic 3.0 and we are back a new fanfic story which is, what if Mitsuki failed the power test? How would his identity change? Part 1. Let's start fanfic without wasting more time. The air in the hidden cavern tasted of ozone and damp earth, a familiar, almost comforting mixture to the young man standing at its nexus. Mitsuki, the artificial creation of the legendary Sannin Orochimaru, stood utterly still, yet his presence vibrated with latent power. His skin, usually a pale, milky white, now possessed a faint, almost luminescent sheen. His normally placid, pale yellow eyes were wide, the pupils slitted like a reptile's, radiating an intense, almost blinding gold. He was clad in his standard attire, the beige trench coat, the mesh armor beneath, the short brown skirt, and the leg guards, but now, these garments seemed secondary, barely containing the transformation brewing within him. Coiling around his shoulders, his back, and even wrapping his left arm, were three monstrous, pure white snakes. Their scales shimmered, and their heads, each as large as a man's torso, were reared back, fangs bared in silent readiness. They were not summoned beasts. They were extensions of his own body, the serpent sage mode fully manifested. Focus. The thought wasn't his own, but a primal instinct, the coded imperative of his creation. He was not one for rash action. Analysis preceded execution. He was here, deep beneath the earth, to test a hypothesis, the upper limit of his inherited nature. Fascinating, Mitsuki murmured, his voice echoing slightly off the cavern walls. He watched the way the light caught the mucus-thin membrane of a snake's eye as it blinked slowly. The snakes were responding to his slightest shift in chakra, moving with a synchronized, silent intelligence that was both frightening and perfectly logical. This particular environment was a nexus of natural energy, a place his father had designated for moments of critical evolution. It was here, in the silence, that Mitsuki wrestled with the concept of his own identity, the why that his father, Orochimaru, had often failed to provide with satisfactory certainty. Was he merely an experiment, or was there an intrinsic purpose woven into the synthetic DNA that made him? He lifted his right hand. The white skin seemed to flow, not crack, as he pushed his will outward. The snake wrapped around his arm extended rapidly, its body momentarily stretching impossibly thin before solidifying into a rigid, whip-like construct, ready to strike. This form was faster, stronger, and infinitely more complex than the simple physical extensions he usually employed. The snakes were channels, amplifiers, conduits for the raw, untamed nature energy he was now processing. A small, isolated cluster of crystals glowed weakly in the distance, the only markers in the oppressive darkness. Mitsuki targeted one. With a calculated ripple of movement, the primary snake extending from his right shoulder struck the crystal, not with brute force, but with a precise, vibrating impact. The crystal didn't shatter. It dissolved into fine dust, the energy absorbing instantly into the snake's scales before being channeled back into Mitsuki's own core. The connection was seamless, proving the efficiency of the transformation. My efficiency remains at peak, he noted, a small, neutral smile touching his lips. But the cost remains unknown. How long can this state be sustained before the instability inherent in nature energy begins to corrupt the synthetic structure? The question hung in the stillness. To know the edge of his capabilities, he would have to push past it. He flexed his fingers, sending a surge of amplified chakra through the coils. The three heads before him hissed simultaneously, the sound like dry sand rattling against stone, a clear signal of readiness. The path ahead, he knew, was to surrender control to the wild essence flowing through him, even if that meant risking the very structure that defined him as Mitsuki. This is just the beginning of Mitsuki's journey into mastering this powerful, almost alien state. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 2, focusing on Mitsuki testing the limits of his endurance against a manufactured threat within the cavern, to see where the corruption begins. Mitsuki stabilized his stance, the golden glow around his eyes intensifying. He focused not on the external nature energy, but on the internal blueprint of his existence, the genetic code implanted by his father, Orochimaru, which sought the perfect form, the state of being untethered from mortal decay. If the body is a temporary vessel, then this state must hold the key to its transcendence, Mitsuki mused, addressing the ambient silence. He knew instinctively that the legendary snake sages achieved immortality not through mere longevity, but by shedding their physical forms entirely, like snakes shedding skin, achieving a state of pure essence. His current power was likely a stepping stone to that. He decided to create a physical challenge, something requiring sustained, high-level output. With a concentrated effort, Mitsuki drew ambient energy inward, channeling it through the snake coiled around his right arm. Instead of striking the inert rock, he commanded the energy to coalesce into a solid form between his hands. The air shimmered violently. The three snake heads thrashed slightly, straining under the concentrated demand. Slowly, a sphere of crackling, greenish-white energy began to form, humming with destructive potential. It was a rough approximation of a Rasengan, but infused entirely with raw, serpentine nature energy, a forbidden synergy. Let us call this. Mitsuki paused, searching for the appropriate nomenclature, the serpent orb. He held the orb steady for a full minute. The effort was tremendous. Where before he felt a distant connection to the energy, now it felt like fire flowing through his veins. His synthetic biology was protesting the unnatural saturation. A hairline fissure, barely visible, cracked across the skin of his left forearm. Instability detected. The internal monitor flashed a warning. This was the threshold he sought. He had to see what happened when he maintained pressure past the safe limit. He pushed more. The orb swelled, its humming rising to a sharp whine. The three snakes reacted violently, their jaws opening wide, not to strike, but to expel a thick, acidic-smelling vapor, a natural defense mechanism against internal overload, perhaps. The fissure on his arm widened, and a sickening, grayish discharge, a byproduct of his synthetic matter reacting poorly to the sheer volume of nature energy, began to seep out. The energy of the orb, when held too long, was attempting to unmake him, reverting his highly structured cells back to primal, chaotic energy. He realized then, his father sought immortality by controlling the snake essence. Mitsuki was attempting to become it. The difference was critical. Control allowed manipulation. Becoming it meant annihilation of the self. With a gasp that was more like the hiss of steam escaping a pressure valve, Mitsuki abruptly stopped the infusion. The serpent orb vanished, the chaotic energy instantly dissipated and recycled back into the cavern's ambient field. He dropped to one knee, the power draining out of him almost as quickly as it had arrived. The golden glow receded, the slit pupils snapping back to their normal, calm yellow. The three snakes quickly coiled back, merging seamlessly into the cloak of his chakra manifestation until they were gone entirely, leaving only the residual coolness of his natural skin. He examined his arm. The fissure was already closing, the regenerative properties of his being kicking in faster than the damage could spread. The gray discharge had evaporated. The corruption is self-limiting, Mitsuki concluded, wiping a bead of sweat, or perhaps something else, from his brow. The body rebuilds faster than the energy can break it down, provided the external source is immediately severed. A calculated risk averted. He stood up slowly, leaning against the damp cavern wall. Immortality remained elusive, but he had learned something profound about the boundary between his created self and the raw power of nature. The key was not brute force, but perfect balance, a concept his father often championed but rarely achieved himself.